What's going on, guys? Today we had on Fred Rubio. He works for Project Chimps, and we got into talking about everything he does there and how he got into it. And it's a very interesting conversation. He's a great guy. Um, I hope you enjoy it. And if you get a chance, please go check out Project Chimps. It's a great organization. So, yeah, hope you enjoy. Have a good day. Hey, man. How's it going? How you doing?
Really good. Yeah, staying busy. Same old stuff. How you doing?
We're good. We're good. Can't complain. Been just busy. So
Yeah,
it's good to get back on doing some podcasts, you know. You're the first
yeah.
one in a few months, so it's gonna be fun to put out. But why don't
Okay,
you
sweet. Yeah,
tell us a little bit about what you do? So you work for
yeah,
Project Chimps, right?
yeah. So, uh, first of all, welcome to the rabbit hole. This is gonna be a big rabbit hole, but yeah, I work at Project Chimps. It's chimpanzee sanctuary, and it's in North Georgia. We're kind of at like the foothills of the Appalachian Trail. So it's kind of got, Appalachia vibes out here. Um, but yeah, it's a pretty neat place. So we've got this big 6 acre habitat that's just encased in a giant concrete wall. It's about like 15 feet high. And we've split it up into two habitats, but we have 99 chimps. And all these chimps, they've come from the same research laboratory in Louisiana. It's the New Iberia Research Center. It's affiliated with the university out there. And yeah, so the reason they've come from this laboratory to the sanctuary is in 2015, there was actually a moratorium on chimpanzee medical research in the US because there's just a lot of pressure to just kind of get rid of that kind of animal testing. It's just really invasive stuff. A lot of chimps were being used for vaccine development. A lot of them were getting cut into. Some of them had parts of their organs taken out. It's really dark stuff. So, a lot of people found out about what was going on and they put pressure to kind of end this type of research. So, yeah, 2015 was the official ban on that kind of research in this country. And there's just all these laboratories that had these animals, and the organizations running these labs are just kind of like, okay, what do we do with them now? We pay to use them, but now we can't use them. And some of these places are like, well, we don't want to pay to keep feeding them. I mean, we're not using them anymore. So there were a bunch of chimpanzee sanctuaries already, and a bunch being like 4 or 5 at that time. But Project Chimps actually got founded the year before that moratorium because they kind of saw the trajectory of where everything was going. They realized that this was going to happen. Chimps were going to need to leave the lab, and they're going to need a place to go. So yeah, our founding board, they acquired this property in North Georgia, and it's so weird because this place used to be a place called Gorilla Haven. We had this woman and her husband who became millionaires in the 90s because he was in software and just computer and tech in general. So he got super rich. She loved gorillas and Diane Fossey, who was basically the Jane Goodall of gorillas. And she's like, hey, can we use the money to build a gorilla sanctuary? And he's like, okay. So they just like built this giant wall that I talked about. They built all these buildings connected to this giant wall, and they contacted Zoo Atlanta, which is pretty well known for having gorillas. And at that time, um, zoos felt like you couldn't have bachelor groups of male gorillas because males or gorillas in general just live in harem type social structures where you have one dominant male and a bunch of females. So anytime they'd have a male, which is 50% of the time, they'd be like, "Oh man, where do we put him? Like he can't go in that group. There's already a silverback." So this place, Gorilla Haven, was like, "Give us your excess males and we'll take care of them." So at the height of Gorilla Haven, I think they only had like 5 gorillas. Like that's all the gorillas they ever had. Because down the line they figured out in the wild, male gorillas live together all the time. Like they even do live in bachelor groups. So you just kind of have like all of those like young males that got kicked out of their group or wanted to leave their group because they're tired of like living with dad because that's who was running the group. And yeah, they just kind of hang out for a few years before they strike off on their own and form their own harem groups. So yeah, the AZA kind of reevaluated what the species plan was for gorillas, and Zoo Atlanta was like, oh, yeah, we'll take our gorillas back. So yeah, they had gorillas for like 5 seconds, and then they were gone, and then this place was kind of sitting empty for a long time. I
Wow.
have no idea how we found out about it, but it was like great for us because I mean the infrastructure was there. So yeah, um, and here we are now. 99 chimps. We only got our first ones back in I think it was 2017, and that was only like 10. So we've like really grown, and we didn't get them all at once. We've taken our time getting new ones. Most recent ones we got were back in June, and I got to be part of that. That was really fun. We have this like dedicated trailer. Just it's your regular old giant trailer meant for like ATVs, dirt biking, what have you. But we repurposed it, and we have these transport cages. We have 10 of them, and we just use that to go to the laboratory, load them up. It's about a day's drive if you drive long enough, and we load them up and we take them back here. And yeah, it was really cool to go to the lab and just see what that was like.
Yeah. So
But yeah,
what what really kind of so let's get some backstory here and like kind of think about what really got you in, because you said you were going to get like what was it, your PhD
yeah,
in
yeah.
now it wasn't specifically in like chimp studies, but that was your um what was it called, thesis,
My
right?
thesis.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, initially I went to grad school and I was like studying primate behavior at Central Washington University. It's just like little university, just literally in the middle of Washington State, in a town called Ellensburg, tiny town. And yeah, the initial plan was get a PhD, teach at a university. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to like just teach people about something I was really passionate about, really interested in. um, I discovered I liked primates during undergrad when I studied human evolution. I took a couple of those classes, and my mind just blew up. Like just kind of learning about all the different kinds of primates, all the different lineages of primates, and who was connected to who. So yeah, my brain started going down the rabbit hole in undergrad, and I was just like, what is humanity? Where did humanity come from? That kind of thing. So yeah, I applied to graduate school at Central Washington, and I was really interested in just cognition, just thought. It's kind of like in line with psychology, but to me, psychology's always been kind of wishy-washy. I studied bio. I'm really about like neuroscience, like all the different cortical areas of the brain, which are responsible for every little thing that we do and think and all of that stuff. So I was just interested in that stuff in context of primates. So that's what my thesis was about, was just kind of like looking into how primates think. So my thesis specifically was just kind of it was a computer game. I made the video game for the chimps essentially, where they had to like do a little bit of a logical test, and if they got it right, like a little food pellet would fall out. So it was a really like big thing that I'd never really done before, which was like building a box that was housing a computer that ran all of these little like motors and things. And I had to get help with it. Like I didn't know like what to do. So I like contacted a guy who knew the programming. It was just using a little Raspberry Pi. Have you ever heard of those
Yep.
things?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's just like this tiny computer, really small, but it's meant for hobbyists, and you can do all sorts of cool robot stuff with. So yeah, I gave that to the chimps, and it was like not just a test, right, to see like how well they could do the logic test, but it was also just a way to enrich them. That's something we really care about in sanctuary. They're essentially like living in a prison. I mean, it's what we recontextualize it because it's not like dark and dreary like a prison, but they're stuck here. They can't go anywhere else. So we need to think of ways to make life more pleasant for them, more engaging. So that was the goal with this thing I had made, was to give them something to do, something fun, but also learn about the way they think. So that was the thesis. They didn't use it very much, so I didn't get a lot of data about how well they could do it. And honestly, I think it was just a design flaw. Like, I don't think it was really intuitive for them to use because it was like a bunch of buttons, a screen. There was this big like box that just had a lot like it was. They're more interested in the box itself. They weren't quite interested in the game itself. Um, if I were going to redesign it, I would make it just like a really small box with just a touch screen on it, and that way they could just mess around with the touch screen and really figure out how it worked that way,
So it
which
was
is something that a lot of yeah. Go ahead.
so it was using actual buttons, kind of like
Yeah,
a controller type deal.
yeah. I got the buttons from like one of those arcade websites because like it became kind of fashionable in the last few years for guys to just build their own arcade boxes where you could play
Yeah.
Pac-Man and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just those exact buttons, and I just kind of like had them arrayed around the screen, but like it was just kind of confusing for them. I feel because like when I gave it to a human to try out and just see like yeah, go ahead, mess around with it, see if you can figure out like what you're trying to figure out, the people couldn't do it either. So it
Oh,
like made
okay.
sense to me because I designed it and I was like, oh, they'll figure it out if they explore it enough. But it was almost like too difficult in that initial stage for even a human person to figure out right away. And this is a chimp, they're on a totally different level than a human. So it's just kind of unfair to judge them on their intelligence when a human being couldn't even figure it out, right? So like ultimately my conclusion was like inconclusive, right? You can't really say that they couldn't figure it out because even the humans couldn't figure out and they wanted to give it a go. So that's the thing about those kinds of tasks. It's really open interpretation. You have to design it well because if you don't design it right, you're just kind of like there's just a giant hole in your study where it's just like, oh, this is a giant mistake. Like you're losing potential data because you just didn't design it well. So
Well,
yeah,
what I would take from that too is just like, for one, it was a great idea. I wouldn't let that go at all. But
yeah,
two, it's like, if you kind of look at how I'm a big video game player, if you look at how like if I were to give like a 40 or 50-year-old woman or man a video game that I play, like Call of Duty or something, it would be the same sort of thing where like it's kind of funny, like why can people not figure it out if I can, But
hmm
there's these different, like, you have to like kind of build up to that. And for people, someone did like a study or something, so they built a video game how to teach people how to play first person shooters, like very
hmm
very simply.
yeah,
And what it was they you had to be able to get them to register, not that they didn't like see the movement and everything, get it, but with the controls and the game, you had to do it based on starting with one each single movement. So like forward and backward, you had to get them to solidify that in their brain, so it would lock the movement. You couldn't turn the like mouse or anything to see, but you could push the forward and backward button, and that got them to kind of realize, and it clicked. And so it went through every plane of movement. First, like right, left, side to side, and then it went into like moving the mouse right to left to look side to side, and then looking up and down. And it's like a 15-20 minute like tutorial thing, but it got like older people that never played video games able to actually play like a first person shooter and kind of understand the controls. So if you think about like the depth that went into just explaining like a normal Call of Duty game to a person, which is a complicated game, but like a lot of older generation people that never really played video games don't understand it. I can see exactly where it's coming from, where it's like, if it's not like the simplest touchscreen, like, because chimps are pretty much like humans from like 100,000 or a million years ago, right?
yeah. I mean, we come from a common ancestor, so it's like they've definitely differentiated in their own way, but we come from the same species, and that was the point of what I was trying to do. I'm trying to like figure out like, okay, do they have this logical ability to make an inference based on their available information? And yeah, that was my whole shtick, because I feel that generally, especially in the United States, historically, animals just get discredited so hard about being intelligent. Like American psychologists are like back in the day were known for just saying that yeah, animals are just robots. Like they just follow, instinctive, hardwired behavior. They're not flexible. They're not smart. We're apart from them. We are, better than them. So, um, yeah, I was just very frustrated with that viewpoint, and it's definitely not as pervasive as it used to be. But there's still little remnants of that here and there. You'll find people who talk like that about animals, and it's just like if you work around them as closely as we do for a week or like whatever amount of time, not a long time at all, just a little while, you can see it. Like there's intelligence, there's personality behind their eyes. You just have to be around them and watch them. So yeah, that was my shtick, and that's why I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to get a PhD so I could like, spread the word, teach people, show them that, they're more intelligent than they are. But I got away from that just because academia is a really rough gig. Uh, there's just a lot of hoop jumping you have to go through. I feel like there's a lot of compromising you have to go through. You move around a lot. You don't get to stay rooted anywhere, and you're all kind of fighting for money. Like you don't just get paid as a professor when you're doing research. You have to fight for grants, and that's just super stressful. And
Oh,
then
I
that's
can only
kind of
imagine.
yeah, and I mean, I was just taking my cue from my advisor when I was at grad school, and like all the other professors who were there in that program. It's just like they're tired. They this is a 24-hour a day job that they're doing because you got your grad students who are like panicking about a draft that they're doing for the thesis, and they're like emailing their professor at 10 p.m. saying like, "Oh my God, I think I did this wrong," and they're good people and they care about their students, so they're replying right back at 10:01 p.m. saying like, "It's okay, you got this, we'll work through it," and that's just their life. That's all they do, and not that I wouldn't enjoy doing that, but I definitely want to have a work-life balance. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'll segue out of that. I think I'll do chimp care for a while before I figure out what the next plan is, if anything.
Absolutely. And like obviously those people are making a huge difference, but like I think what you're doing is also making a huge difference and
Yeah,
potentially able to put out like more of word on this to the general public. Cuz
right. Yeah.
going off what you were saying before, it's like that idea of that humans are just like smarter than everything else and all that. I feel like that's kind of like the common knowledge people get from like a high school level education. And like unless you dive into it or it's like your major, like that's what most people are going to think. They don't realize like the that especially chimps and other like animal species like have like kind of like their own society even though they're not. I think the main difference between humans and animals is we're just like pushed to make things. Like animals don't really like they make tools and they make like dens and stuff, but they're not like they're not obsessed with technology like humans are. I think that's kind of the big differentiation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's like something I came across a lot when I was doing my thesis was like, what makes humans different? Like, this is something like people have been scrambling to answer for a long time because they see the inherent similarities between us and the other primates. And they're like, but we're special. We have to be special. How are we different? We have to find it. And it used to be tools. Like that was the thing. It's like humans make tools that makes us special. But then we had Jane Goodall go to the Gombe forest in the 60s, and she saw these chimps using tools to get termites out of the ground. And it's not just a stick; they have an entire like suite of tools that they use in order to get the termites. And humans are trying to do it themselves, and they say it's not easy. Like this is a skill that they're learning how to do, and they figured it out, and they have to teach their young how to do it. So like it's the takeaway that everyone is getting about what makes us different is that it's a difference of degree and not a difference of kind. So everything that we are good at and everything that makes us, exceptional is just the fact that we are, 10 steps ahead of all the other animals and not really the fact that we do something different than them.
Mhm.
It's just that we do it better than them. And we're flexible. And I mean, I would say that's like really a major, defining characteristic of humanity is that you can stick us in a jungle. You can stick us in Antarctica. You can put us in a desert. We'll make it. If we have enough of a knowledge background, we'll make it. Like you can't do that for every animal. There's plenty of animals that die if you do that. But us, that's what we do best. We adapt. So
That's fair. I never
yeah,
even thought about it that way. That's cool. And like
yeah,
I have another question to ask you then on that subject. Do you think, given like obviously we can't understand what chimps are like relaying to each other, but do you think they like kind of hold like a history? Like I think that might be another thing that kind of puts us different, and it might just be that like they don't have scriptures and ways to keep knowledge like we do over long periods of time, but like history and like the knowledge of like do you think they'll get to like the point where they're keeping their own like history books and stuff, I guess you'd say, because like it kind of seems like they might be in like the stone age now, and when they find fire they might be able to cook their food, and like once they cook their food it that goes to the whole thing, where their brain will expand the amount because they don't have to put as much what is it, energy joules into digesting food, and that's what made humans so intelligent back when we changed.
yeah. So that's really interesting because I feel like we're kind of talking about culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, do they have a collective, you know, history as a group of animals that they pass on to the next generation? And the answer is yes, they have culture. Like there's this really, really fascinating study that came out in the early 90s. Can't remember who did it. I think his last name was Whiten. And he basically looked at all of the chimpanzees, all of them. Like there's four subspecies, and they're all across equatorial Africa. They all have different ways of doing things. So they all have their own way of, collecting food. Some of them don't have access to termite mounds, so they don't fish for termites out of the ground, but others do. And you have others that live around bush babies, which are just these tiny primates that are nocturnal that live inside tree hollows during the day. Some of those chimps make spears and they actually stab into these tree hollows and they pull out these bush babies and they eat them. They make spears. And you've got other chimps who have access to areas with really hard nuts. And chimps have impressive jaws. They have impressive teeth. They can crack open a walnut with their jaw, no problem. But these nuts are just incredibly dense. Even they cannot crack them. So what do? They find rocks and they carefully crack them open with the rocks like a hammer and anvil. And they do it in such a way where they're not just smashing the kernel inside. They're just breaking the casing of the nut and keeping the kernel whole so that they're like, maximizing how much food they're actually collecting. And their young learn this from their parents over like a decade. So like as soon as they're born and they come across these areas, these like the baby chimps are literally watching their parents do this. It's the mom, and they'll try it. They're it's you've heard the phrase monkey see monkey do. It applies to apes too. And they're watching their mom and they're trying to emulate it. They're trying to break open the nuts, but they don't know how to do it, and they end up like messing it up. They end up not breaking it open at all. But the moms will give them some, and over years they just finally it starts to click. They get old enough to the point where they're like, oh, I'm getting a feel for it now. So it's hard to say what exact trajectory led to humans branching off from the Australopithecine apes to lead to where we are now. But hypothetically, in like a Planet of the Apes doomsday type scenario where humans got wiped out, that trajectory could exist for chimps and you could get a Planet of the Apes. But it's a very specific trajectory, obviously. Like it doesn't just happen. You have to have all these variables lined up. So yeah, hypothetically, it could happen again. There's no reason why it couldn't happen again. So, yeah, it's scary to think about, but also really cool,
I was gonna say it's more. It makes me kind of like think it's cool rather than I'm not even scared by that. That just seems cool. I mean,
Yeah,
eventually, what if we were just like coexisting together? It would be kind of wild.
yeah. So
Like,
I love the Planet of the Apes movies. Like, plenty of people come up to me and they're like, "Aren't you afraid of them taking over?" And I'm like, "They're nowhere near that. That they couldn't possibly do that right now. Like, there's no way." And like, it would be Planet of the Apes, like the reboot movies, where it's like, if we saw them doing that, we definitely wouldn't be okay with it, and they would get subdued, obviously. So it's like, yeah, no, they're nothing to worry about. It would literally have to be a plague wiping out humanity before they'd
Yeah.
have a shot. So
Absolutely. I
yeah,
It's cool to think about though, like, well, why does it even have to go to war? Like imagine like literally just coexisting. That'd be kind of wild. But
yeah.
um so you got through um like school and stuff, and like how did you get to the point where like, hey, there's this place called Project Chimps and I want to work there? Or is it like you met someone? Like, what's your background with that? Like, how'd you get involved with them? Because you've been there, what, 6 years, right?
Um, I got the first time I came here was 2018, so yeah, like 4 years
Okay.
cumulatively. Um, but yeah, it was through school. I mean, that was one of the things I wasn't exactly prepared for. Is I went to the program thinking that I would just kind of like hitch on with my advisor's work, like just kind of help them do their research maybe, or just like splinter off from the research and do it that way. But I got there and they're like, okay, you gotta find a place where you're gonna collect your data yourself, no help. You just figure it out. And I was like, oh, cool, that's terrifying. I have to like find a place. Okay. So my advisor had a previous student who was already working here. So there was that like bridge of contact, and I submitted, my proposal. I basically like laid out what my thesis was going to be, what it would entail for my data collection, and I sent it here. They reviewed it, and they're like, "Yeah, come on over. Like this sounds cool. You'll get what you need. The chimps will get this enrichment that they've never gotten before. It'll be fun for them." And so I did, and um, kind of left early. I left before the quarter was over even, but it was spring quarter, so there's only like a few weeks left. And I spent the summer and fall of 2018 here collecting data. It was supposed to only take the summer, but putting this like box together and getting it working actually took way longer than I expected it to. So it was no sweat really. It ended up working fine, and then I went back to school, um, and I loved it here. I had so much fun because it was just really really at the ground level when I got here because I don't think there was even a third of the chimps that we have now at that point. I think it was maybe like maybe it was like 40 chimps or so at that point, maybe 30. So it's just like there's a lot of our buildings that were empty. Like we didn't even have all the buildings that we had in place filled with chimps yet. They were just sitting empty. But we were like shuffling them around, and we'd only get like single sex groups. That's how they come to us. Because at the lab, they want to pay for birth control. They want to like do vasectomies on the males. So they just like put them in single sex groups. You'll have all males, you'll have all females. So some of them had never even been mixed yet. So when they come here, one of our priorities is to put them together. So that was really exciting because you get to watch that happen, and that's something that we were working on when I came here the first time was like getting their first group of mixed sex together. So that was like an entire process. They're going really slow with it because it was the first time they were doing it. It took like about a year before they finally got them all together. But after that, we like really expedited the process. So now when we get our when we get our single sex groups and we start introing them to each other, that whole process is done within a month.
Oh wow.
So it's fast, and we've had such great success with that. Like it's really nerve wracking thing. Chimps are incredibly violent. They are not nice to each other. They use their teeth. They use their muscles to wreck each other. So we're always wary of that. We're always ready for that. It can go south really quick, and it has for other people who've tried to put chimps together like this. But so far, like knock on wood, it's just been really good. We haven't had any major injuries from our intros. So being part of that was just too alluring to like step away from. And I knew I wanted to get a PhD, but I also knew that I wanted to do this for a while because this place, especially being so new, being so ground level, there's just so much growing that needed to happen. And it was just so much fun to be able to come in at the ground level and actually shape policy, actually shape the environment that these chimps were coming into. Um, so yeah, I applied for a job basically as soon as I went back to school, and like they knew when I was gonna graduate, so they were like, okay, like we won't give you a response right away. But yeah, it was probably like a month before I graduated before they officially said yes, and they liked me well enough, obviously, because they hired me back on. So, but there's a little bit of like time where I was kind of like sweating it a little bit. I'm like, oh, are they gonna like take me back or not? Um, but yeah, it was already decided in my mind when I left the first time. I was like, I'm coming back. I'm not gonna be gone for long. It was only half a year that I was gone. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it was addicting. Really,
Yeah,
that's what it was.
so going to like going back to like where you're saying like when you guys were mixing the groups together, like obviously what was like the process like? Was it like you guys kind of let them around each other for like half an hour and then like kind of took them away? Was it like a slow kind of like osmosis, or was it like um I don't know, you put one in one or like a few, I don't know, is there like a hierarchy that has to be established in terms of like we put like four female chimps and one male chimp, so there's like some sort of bounds or something like that? Want to just explain it maybe a little bit more in terms of like the risk and like how it was able to?
Yeah. So, um, the first time, like I said, we did this, it took a year because what we were trying to do was get every single male to meet with every single female several times. So that just was a huge chore because good luck getting that one chimp that you need to meet with that other one chimp. Like chimps are really stubborn. They're very willful. So when you're trying to like shift them into a room or shift them out of a room, it's a force of wills. So that's why it took so long doing it that way. The process that we moved on to that's been so successful for us is um, still doing those like small interactions, but doing them quickly and not necessarily like necessitating that each individual meets every individual before you move on to doing two and twos. So we'll do two males and two females. And the way that goes is you kind of give them a shared wall, and we put this very like fine mesh in between that wall so that they can't even stick their fingers through it, but they can still see each other, and like they just have that like half inch of space between. And once they've gotten to a point where they calm down, that's when you open up one of the doors and you let a pair have even closer access, and then you'll like get them out and you'll let the other pair have closer access where they actually have that barrier where it's big enough to stick a finger through. And as long as their interactions are calm, relatively calm, and they aren't being overly aggressive, that's when you get to do the fun part, which is just a full-on, full contact intro between the pairs. And that's the most exciting part of the process to me, is because you haven't seen them interact with these chimps fully before. They've been around each other for a while. Obviously, they're in the same building, but they haven't had that actual close contact yet. And you think you'll know the chimp, but as soon as you introduce them to a completely new individual that they've never lived with before, you just see a whole other side of them. That one chimp that you thought was really reserved and quiet all of a sudden is like really outgoing and really sociable, or that one chimp that you thought was quiet and subdued is actually really aggressive. And so we just log those. We log all those interactions. Like we literally have a grid of names for the males and the females, and you just kind of like mark who's met who, and then you write down from that date what their interaction was like, and you just keep those factors in your head as you continue that process of doing pairs until most of the individuals have met each other somehow. Um, and then you can start moving on to doing like maybe threes and threes or even fours and fours. But then you get to the day where you're actually going to make them live together. You're going to give them access to everything. And for that day, the best thing that we found is to do osmosis. I really like that description. I'm going to borrow that now. We're going to use that every time we do our intros. So you'll build a core group. You'll have your two males and two females, and that'll be your core. Those are going to be the ones who interacted the best with everybody, the ones that are the most level-headed, and you'll slowly introduce one or two chimps at a time to that core group until you've gotten all the chimps into that core group. And what's really great about that method is you've kind of shifted the power dynamic. So before, you know, if you try to like intro a bunch of females to the males would probably more than likely aggress really hard on the females. But by making a new core group that's mixed, anytime you add a new chimp, they have to acclimate to that new core group. Their old alliance is dead. Like it's not dead, but it doesn't matter as much because there's a new core group that doesn't involve their previous relationship to whatever chimps in that core group. The core group is what matters. So that works really well because they're shy and they're gauging everything and they're like, what do I do? How do I fit in? So that's the key though. They're trying to figure out how to fit in with the new group. So they're not going to like go crazy because it's a new context. And yeah, that'll take a day. And then finally you'll get to the point where you open all the doors. And normally that's when the chaos ensues. When everything's open and all the chimps are together now, you'll have a giant screaming match. But last time we did this, and this is the group I've been working with like almost exclusively since we got them back in June. They've been the coolest group we've ever had. So level-headed, just immediately meshing together, getting along, making those friendships. When they did that, when they opened all the doors, I didn't get to be there for it, unfortunately. It was on my day off. But they said it was dead quiet. Like there was nothing. So these chimps were just like already like so comfortable being around each other that they didn't lose their heads when they like got to be completely together. So that's the stuff we live for is when you've worked here for 4 years and you think you know everything and then something like this happens and you're just like, I don't know Jack. Like I, I'm here all the time, I'm here every day, and I know these individuals so well and they still surprise you. So that's what we all live for. And that's what our lunches are all about. When everyone comes back from their building after cleaning and feeding all the chimps and they all sit down and we're all eating together, all we're doing is talking about what the chimps were doing. Like
That's sick.
this. Yeah. So it's they're just surprising us constantly,
It's
and that's what's
oh, keep going.
and like I was saying, it was just that's what's frustrating about people who don't even work with animals, saying that they're not individuals, that they don't have personality, that they're not intelligent. It's just like work with them. You can't say that after you've never spent any time with them. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, for one, to go off what you were just saying, that is insanely interesting. Like,
Yes.
if that doesn't go to show that like they're so much like us, like that like introducing one person to a new group, you get the same sort of effect. Like like just hearing that, like most people would be like, "Oh my god, like that's wild," because like you gotta think about like how like close that would be, like if I don't know you're trying to survive in the apocalypse or something, and like your group meets up with another group, and it has to go kind of the same way. You gotta get the leaders together to create the core group to make the alliance or whatever, and then everyone else kind of has to mesh their way in and make it work in like a similar way if you guys are gonna work together or whatever.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. And it's really funny that you like mentioned that because like I went into all of this looking for human behavior in non-human primates. Like, and that's what I was interested in. I was looking for those like little specks of humanity in chimpanzees and other animals like that. But I ended up coming out finding specks of chimpanzees in humanity. So it's like, we are obviously on a like upper level, but every once in a while you just see stuff in humans where you're just like, oh my God, that guy's a total ape right now. Like my favorite example was me and my roommate were coming to work one day here, and we're at a four-way stop, and somebody to our left didn't go when the person behind them thought they should have. So they stepped out of their car and they start like swearing at the
oh
guy
my
because he didn't go at a four-way stop when he should have. So that guy who got yelled at got out of his car and he started yelling at the other guy. And then this third guy steps out of his car who's even further back in the line behind those two, and he's yelling back at them.
god.
And me and my roommate just look at each other and like, are you seeing this right now? This is 110% chimp behavior. Like they're all displaying at each other, trying to like, measure each other and like show each other who's boss. That's literally what male chimpanzees do all the time. So we were just laughing. It was like one of the funniest things we'd ever seen. But like, yeah, it's like if you watch The Walking Dead, I feel like that is the exact scenario where it's just like you have tribes now, and that's what chimps are. They're tribal. So they're like coming into conflict with other tribes all the time. And, sometimes they like blend, but most of the time there's friction and they split. So, yeah, I mean, that's what's cool about The Walking Dead, I think. I always enjoy that show, but it is about, kind of like the more primate side of humanity and in that situation where resources are like scarce and you have to figure out who gets what. So
That's so
yeah,
funny because that's the exact show I was thinking of when I was saying that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's the same. It's really the same. Like you're just watching a bunch of apes do ape stuff on that show. Like that's
yeah.
all it's about.
Well, think of it this way. It's like it's funny that you said that like you're going in looking for human things in chimps, and I think that goes to a lot of the reasons we can't answer questions in science. Um, is because we're asking the wrong questions. Because, like, think about it this way: we can't like we would see chimp things in us or any primate things in us because like that's where we came from. So we got to take like I don't know. It's almost like especially kind of like not coming at the academic field, but there's like this ego with it. And once you take that ego out and you think of the delineation of like where we came from or like the question you're asking, like what are you putting at the center of your question? Um, it kind of comes to like you were saying, it's just like, oh, this is where we came from. So like it makes sense that we see chimp behavior in humans. But like the ego in that question was like finding like we're humans and we're better. So like that's like kind of where that came from. And it's so cool that like you've learned like so much from them that like I would have never even thought of people screaming at each other being like chimp behavior. But like you pointed that out and I'm like, holy shit, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, it is wild. Like it's the ego thing is very accurate. Like you're not coming at academia at all. That's just the way it is. And honestly, that was like part of the turnoff for me. It's like it's not even about learning anything anymore most of the time. Because that's what I'm all about. I'm all about learning whatever I can about all sorts of stuff. I just love learning new things. But when you go into academia, it just turns into an ego contest. So I was like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to learn, and that's what it's supposed to be about to me. But
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, it's become something else. So yeah,
And it's not also just like ego in the sense of like, oh, we're bigger and better. It's just like how we're almost like conditioned to think when we're asking questions too. Like the
yeah,
question, a lot of I feel like the hard scientific questions we have, even when it comes to like obviously we don't have an answer to this, but like the idea of like Earth being the center of everything or the only like place of like life, like what makes our planet just because it supports life and it's awesome and everything, but like what makes that the center of the universe versus is there even a center of the universe? It's like there's that ego of like, since this is all we know, it becomes the basis of the question rather than the question like trying to figure out what you actually want to figure out. But it's like where you place that start of the question, where is like the center point, you know?
yeah. No, that's a really great point. Because I mean, yeah, it makes sense. Like if you're a person who doesn't study astrophysics, then or even care about astrophysics, you're not going to even conceptualize the fact that our planet, our solar system, our galaxy is just, a pinprick in, a vast ocean of space. So, yeah, if you don't care about that stuff, your little world is everything. And, to your life it is, and that's fine. But, the people who are able to conceptualize the fact that I am not the center of everything, you have a different worldview, literally, and you have a different question to ask, like you said. So, yeah, that is something that's really important in science when you are asking questions. You have to like ask, what are my inbuilt fundamental prejudices, biases, worldviews? Because if you don't think that that's going to affect your questioning and your, process of answering a question, then you've already failed. You have to address those things. So it's a big question, and I know there's plenty of people who do, um, like who are evaluating that whole side of academia, and it's really cool. Like academia is actually getting pretty meta right now, in that we're asking, how is the process of even gathering data affecting our subjects? Like in primate studies, people are asking, like, what is even the presence of a person watching these animals doing to affect their behavior? Or what is these people who are going to these third world countries, telling the indigenous people that they need to change their entire ways of life in order to save these animal species? What effect is that having? And what they're finding is it's a little counterproductive. If you have like a person like me go to equatorial Africa and tell these people who are struggling to make ends meet that they need to prioritize this hairy animal who raids their crops, they're going to get a little pissed off. So it's like this is something that's happening in academia. Is like people are kind of challenging even the right to do research, even because it's kind of like traipsing on human rights and doing so sometimes. So yeah, it's really complicated, and it's not straightforward. And there are a lot of people who go into this wanting to like save these animals through conservation, but like I said, like conservation itself is almost turning into an ethical dilemma. It's like, well, yeah, you're saving the animal, but kind of screwing over the humans who have to live next to them, who are the most likely to take care of them. So yeah, it's really crazy.
That's very interesting. It almost
Yeah,
yeah, because yeah, it goes to the whole kind of I don't know if you've ever heard of the butterfly effect, but everything kind of affects everything else. So like
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah, I mean you could say the same thing about a lot of different things, but like in terms of even just like saving, say it's deer, and you like limit the amount of deer people can hunt. If you bring down the count so much, then you have overcrowding of population, and then the predator. It's like I don't know if you'd like to describe it better, but there's like even with conservation, it makes it hard because you have to take into every account every little different thing. Like like I was saying with the deer, then the tick population blows up and it screws everyone in the area and Lyme disease skyrockets, not to mention the predator um, amount of predators rise because they can eat more, but then the deer population drops and you get this big famine of the predators, and it has this huge giant effect, and it's like you have to calculate all the different things before you can go into somewhere.
yeah. Ecology is so hard, and like that's all they do. All they do is just keep track of all of those variables and try to figure out like where the humans screwed up somewhere and how to counteract that. But it almost turns into a self-defeating thing because it feels like most of the time the more we interfere, even when it's to correct a previous mistake, the more butterfly effects we make. And it reminds me of this. There's this old show on Nick. It was called The Wild Thornberries. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I've heard of it. I don't
Uh,
think I've ever seen it.
they had this really brilliant episode to kind of describe like an ecological collapse cascade effect, where the main girl, she like gave this bird a sewing needle in order to like collect maggots to eat more easily, because it was just using like cactus spines before. And it just turned into this whole thing where the bird got fat, and these other animals that were eating the grubs couldn't eat the grubs, so they were dying. And the animals that were eating those animals were dying. And it all started because she was like handing out these sewing needles to these birds so they could get fat on grubs. And so she like realizes like, oh crap, like I did that. And she figured out like I just gotta take the sewing needles back. And it was a cartoon,
Yeah,
but like everything went back to normal after she did that. But in reality, when like humans do something similar to that, it's like it's really hard to take it back. So
that's
well, it was
wild.
yeah, it was great. It was such an educational episode. This was like in the '90s, and I watched it and I was just like, oh wow, this is kind of heavy. Like even as like a little like 9 or 10 year old kid, I was just like, oh, she made a big mistake. Like that's bad. I didn't realize it was just like a little microcosm for basically all of humanity's effect on the planet. So
Wow.
it
That's
was yeah, it was
wild.
very enlightening. Yeah,
Ha-
it was a good show.
Have you heard about the iguanas in Florida? People are hunting iguanas now because they're an invasive
Oh
species down. Yeah, it's like a big thing. People go since there's no predators for like iguanas because they're not from Florida. Same thing with pythons actually in the Everglades. People are hunting those
yeah,
too. But people are going out and hunting iguanas because they're invasive species and destroying the the natural environment. They got out during one of the hurricanes, one of the big hurricanes. People left their iguanas behind and they got out and they're massive. They're like 15 pounds, like giant now. And
yeah.
so people are going out and hunting them because the population's gotten massive.
Man, that's just like such a common story, though. It's like it literally happens all over the world. And it's funny that you mentioned Florida. I feel like it's always Florida where these things happen. But there's actually a population of wild monkeys in Florida.
Really?
And it's the same thing. Like I think it's species of macaque, which is kind of like a mid-sized old world monkey. But this guy in like 100 years ago, he was doing riverboat tours, and he wanted to spice it up a little bit because he thought it was like a little boring for his customers. So he bought some monkeys and he dumped them on this island in the middle of the river that he was giving tours on, so that he could point. So it was like, oh look, there's monkeys in this like Florida river. And what the guy didn't realize was the monkeys could swim. So he brought these monkeys that could swim to this little island, but then they got off the island and they blew up. There's like literally hundreds of monkeys that like just originated from like a very small population just in the swamps of Florida from this guy who just dumped a couple. Like,
Oh my
and
god.
yeah, and like there's not a lot about it, but I learned about it at a university in San Diego from a professor of anthropology there, and it was just like I asked her, I was like, does the Florida government like know about this? Do they care about this? And she's like, oh yeah, but it's just like one of those things where, like, how do you handle that? You like you have people hunting the animals, which isn't really great because I mean it's not their fault they're there. They're just thriving, which is good for them, bad for everybody else. So yeah, Florida, man, they
Yeah,
they're, they're,
literally.
there's something else over there.
That's funny. That's wild. That is not.
Yeah.
I never even like expected that.
Yeah, nobody knows about this. It's like I bring it up once in a while, and people are like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, look it up. It's real."
That's wild. Well, how about we hop to how is it like cuz obviously like it has probably shaped your reality so much and like how you view the world like working here. Like have you noticed exactly like how it's like or how it's really affected like how you look at things? Cuz even from like how you said your thesis kind of changed after or like how you look at versus human behavior versus chimp behavior, like that's changed obviously, but like you have like profound experiences, I should say, that have really kind of shaped how you look at the world after working there.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of unfortunate, but I think a lot of people who go into this work get kind of burnt out because, especially with what we're doing, working with these animals that were exploited in like just really horrific ways, um, kind of makes you a little pessimistic. But I think I'm one of the people who's really good at like not letting that take over. We've definitely had people work here who just kind of let that consume them, and it speaks to their empathy, which is great. That they have so much empathy that they're able to really internalize what these animals have gone through and let it really resonate with them. But it's definitely not healthy. And this is another trend that's kind of been occurring over the last few years is just recognizing the fact that people who do this work tend to get burnt out because they get so attached to the animals that they're caring for and they get so involved with what they went through that they kind of compromise their own health. So yeah, I think a lot of us tend to get a little like jaded and a little dark about humanity because of what it did to these animals. And there's a lot of books that you can read about specific details about what these kinds of animals went through. Um, the book that I recommend everybody reads who wants to learn more about this stuff and just kind of dip their toe in the water about it is a book called Next of Kin by a guy named Roger Fouts. And he was actually one of the guys who kind of founded the program at the university that I was at for grad school. And he was involved with those sign language studies with the chimps that they were doing decades ago, where they're literally trying to teach chimps language. And it's kind of like a mixed success type study. We learned a lot about chimps from those studies. But at the end of the day, we found out that they just don't have language to the degree that we do. They have language, it's just not at our level. But in that book that he wrote, the reason that it's so good that I recommend it to all these people is that he talks about all of the context, all the settings that these chimps in this country have gone to, what they've been through while they were there. He's talking about, the NASA space program and how they're using chimps for testing them, and how some of them like literally had their brains just obliterated from crash tests and stuff. And just talking about how, yeah, they went through really dark medical studies where they're getting cut open and having parts torn out, and just things like that. It just kind of bogs it down a little bit if you think about it too long or too hard. So what we like to do here though is, yeah, acknowledge the past, recognize where they came from, recognize that where they're at is just light years away from where they were. They're in a much happier place. They don't have to get, shot with the dart gun every day so that they can be part of a study to see how they walk, which is one of the more high profile studies that a couple of our chimps went through. They were just, shaved, painted with dots, and then, they had a computer algorithm analyze the dots to study how they walk compared to a human and how they walk. The like results of that study was like, oh wow, chimpanzees walk differently upright than humans do. And it's just like, you didn't need to do a study to find that out.
No.
And these two chimps that were part of that study, they're a little different. And it's hard to say exactly why they're different compared to the other chimps, but it's not hard to it's really easy to say that it was probably something to do with the fact that they were getting darted all the time. They're getting forced to walk upright all the time, and they were hanging out with humans and not chimpanzees the entire time they were doing it. These two are just so partial to humans. They love humans, and they still get along with their chimps, the other chimps, well. But this is how we describe the chimps. They're either a human chimp or a chimps chimp, and these two are definitely human chimps. And it's absolutely to do with their upbringing. They're really young. They spend a lot of time with humans, and that's just what they're comfortable with and used to. So um, their names are Hercules and Leo, and they're some of my two best buds because they just love humans so much. And I'm one of the more enthusiastic caregivers when it comes to play. So whenever they see me, they're like stomping around, wanting to play chase, wanting to play tug of war. And so, yeah, I've grown really close to those two specifically, but they're different. They're a little weird because of what they went through. So, yeah, it's made all of our worldviews just a little darker, but it's we've got that hope because we recognize that as a society that was wrong, and we grew past that. So it's not all dark and dour, and that's what we really try to tell everybody. It's like they're better now, they're happier now. So it's one of those things. Like even studying human history, there's a lot of dark chapters in human history that
Absolutely.
people don't like to dwell on, and that's the key, right? You don't dwell on it. You have to acknowledge it. You have to learn from it, but then you move on. So that's what we do. Um, this history that they've gone through is much more recent. It's much more tangible. It's much more in front of your face. But
Exactly.
we're moving past it, and that's good.
There's a lot of good messages to take from that.
Yeah,
Other than the horrific things that have been done to these chimps, I think it's, and you kind of touched on it, that's like, yeah, humans did that to them, but look what humans are doing for them now in the wake of
exactly.
trying to. And
And I mean, that's such a good point. I mean, we have a huge volunteer base. We have so many people who spend so much time here. for free, just doing all that stuff that we cannot do as employees alone. Like we have people coming in every day to make our meals. We have people coming in every day, like giving tours to people when we need someone to give tours. And we have people who actually come and clean chimp shit with us. These people are like rock stars. Like they are literally doing the dirtiest job I can imagine for free. And these are older people too. These are people like in their 60s and 70s. So it's inspiring, and it's an optimistic thing.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. And after hearing all that, I do have a few questions that like I'm just kind of intrigued to think what your thoughts are on like um since you're making like their lives like better, is there any like you were telling me about it, I'd like you to talk about it again, and like how most of them like really haven't seen the outdoors before. And you had a story that went along with this. I don't know if you'd like to share it. Um,
Yeah, so that's the thing about the laboratory. If you want to tease apart the word laboratory, the root of that word is labor. Their entire objective is to do work, and their work was biomedical research. So the place that they came from is actually, I think, in my opinion, one of the better laboratories because they acknowledge the fact that these are wild animals that have specific needs that need to be addressed. And this place has these giant primadomes that they're called. They're just kind of like outdoor um, play areas for the chimps to hang out in. So they're not just like cooped up in a concrete building all day. They actually have these little yards they can go into. It looks just like the Thunderdome from Mad Max, the third movie, if you ever seen that. They have this just giant like mesh dome thing that they get to play in, which is awesome. So that's their outside experience, though. Some of these chimps have gotten to go out before, like in an actual like outside yard, because um, chimps were like trading cards back in the day when it came to research. Like all of the places that had chimps would kind of like collaborate with each other and trade chimps and say like, hey, you got an old female? I need an old female for this study, and be like, yeah, sure, here, take this one. And so some of our chimps have definitely gotten to go outside before, and you can kind of see it for some of them. Like when they get to go outside for the first time, they're just like, hell yeah, like I know what this is. I'm gonna have a good time. But then you do have the young ones, and Herc and Leo, who I was talking about before, they're part of the group that is like the youngest chimps that we have in the sanctuary period, and they're the other group that I've worked with almost exclusively. Um, Never been out before, so they'd lived in the Primadome, but the very first time that those boys went outside, Leo, he went out, and they were all just overwhelmed. They had never been anywhere that didn't have some sort of enclosure over their heads. They'd always had like chain link or metal or something over their heads. And they were just so weirded out being outside. Like they didn't know what the dirt was. They didn't know what the trees were. And Leo just, when he went out, he just stared at the sky. Like he was just staring at the sky. And he had this look of panic on his face. Like it almost looked like he was standing on a cliff's edge and he felt like if he leaned forward too far, he was going to fall into an abyss. Like that's the look he had on his face, just staring at the sky because he just saw openness. So that's like a really powerful thing. And this is actually all recorded on video. Like if you go to the Project Chimps website, our YouTube channel, there's a video you can actually find that group going outside for the first time. So you can actually see that look on his face in that video. And yeah, it's just such awesome thing to give them. They haven't had that before. It's a big deal whenever we get these new chimps and we get to put them outside for the first time. This is something that everybody in the sanctuary stops what they're doing and goes to watch. Firstly, because it's a really cool moment, but secondly, you don't know if something bad might happen, so you just want everybody on deck in case something like happens that shouldn't happen. So yeah, giving them that is really important to us. We only have the 2 yards right now, and we have 6 groups. So that isn't great. We acknowledge that that isn't great. We would love it if every group could go outside every day. But as it is now, they are in a 3-day rotation. So they are going out every third day, and we are expanding. And part of our plan is to increase our yards so that we can increase that frequency of them going out into a yard every day. So that is on the table. This is something that is happening. and we are just looking for big donors to really help us make this happen. Because I mean we're nonprofit, man. Like we make a little bit of money, like doing ticket sales for our tours that we do for big public events, but those only happen twice a year or 3 times a year. So that is not our main source of revenue. Our main source of revenue is just straight up people who care to donate without getting any kind of tangible thing in return, just knowing that they are helping. So yeah, that's something we're always on the lookout for, is just help to do this thing that we're doing. But yeah, going outside, it's something we take for granted. Uh, but for them, it's a completely new world. So it's just awesome to watch,
That
give them
is
that new world.
that's so powerful. Just like I don't know if it was me misreading you or not, but I could tell you that kind of meant a lot to you, watching that
Yeah,
experience.
yeah,
So going back to the experimentation on chimps, I think that kind of we can kind of draw back to our conversation earlier, the idea that humans are better than other animals, and maybe that's why people were experimenting on chimps in the first place, and people are starting to have a better outlook and be more knowledgeable, given like just how you said that like the outlook has kind of changed, from realizing people aren't there aren't human things in chimps, there's chimp things in humans because we came from there. I think that kind of goes along with this, could be looked at as the whole reason we were doing research on them in the first place. It was that old mentality, and then the new mentality came through that like, oh, what are we doing this to things we're so close to? Why are we doing that? And that's why it's stopping.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's definitely that. I mean, you've had animal advocates for decades now, like people just trying to get rid of animal testing, period. But like, how much success have they had? I mean, how many moratoriums have you heard of for animal testing? Like, there's still plenty of monkeys even that you are legally allowed to experiment on, and they get just as much like the short end of the stick as the chimps were. There's another great book that I recommend to people who want to delve into the darkness of that, called Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals, I think. And it's just about this guy who worked for one of the most infamous uh, primate researchers in US history, who literally made an experiment involving a chamber that he called the pit of despair. So this guy acknowledged the fact that he was essentially torturing monkeys, and he continued to do these studies anyway. So that guy's name was Henry Harlow, and the pit was literally just a box turned so that one of its corners was at the bottom, and the monkey couldn't comfortably sit down on a level surface. And this, even now, like thinking about it, there was no objective to that. He just did it to do it, like just to see what would happen. So yeah, it's things like that that just really tick people off. But like we have a moratorium on chimpanzee research because we acknowledge our closeness to them, our kinship to them. We see ourselves in them, and we are able to, extend our empathy just a little bit in order to not exploit them anymore. So yeah, like we can change, we can grow, we can prove it. Like this happened. This is a thing that we did. So it's like I said, it gives you hope. Like we are moving in a better direction, and we can move in a better direction. Um, yeah, we are trying to work on getting monkeys next. Like that is definitely something that a lot of people on like my realm acknowledge, and they see it and they know that it is something that we need to worry about next. But there are still plenty of chimps that are in laboratories and things that need to get out. Like they're not getting used anymore, but obviously we want to take care of the chimps first.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just under 1,000 chimps that I think are still in those places. Well, actually, no. We reached a tipping point in the last couple of years where we actually have more chimpanzees in sanctuary than we do in laboratories.
Oh
So
wow.
like they're still there, and we still have around 100 chimps at that laboratory that we need to bring here. So that's why we're expanding, because we just don't have the infrastructure for them right now. So like we're prioritizing them, but yeah, there's still more work to do, and there's still more objectives that we can reach and try to make happen.
Well, I think it looks like things are looking up though for chimps
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
sanctuaries, and
for sure.
very happy to make that have you guys having had that happen and be able
Yeah.
to achieve that because it is huge.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there is a curious question when you were talking about the sign language studies with chimps and how their language isn't like right at where. What exactly do chimps eat? Do they eat meat at all, or do they eat just like different sorts of vegetables or things, maggots and stuff?
Yeah. So they are. I think they're technically labeled as being frugivorous omnivores. So I'm not really sure why it got like honed in on frugivory, like eating fruits specifically, because they literally do eat everything. Like it doesn't matter what it is, they eat it. If it's within reach, they eat it. Um, yeah, they eat vegetables, they eat fruit, they eat nuts, they eat roots, they eat mammals, birds, like whatever's around. So, and it comes back to that culture I was talking about. Like chimps are literally across equatorial Africa. Africa is huge, and the equator goes like straight across it, like through the Congo, all the way through like the same areas that gorillas are in. It goes into like Tanzania. You have chimps that live in the savannah, like where you find giraffes and things. So it's like they live in a whole like array of places. It's not just jungle. It's mostly jungle, but they're everywhere. And you see the like speck of humanity in them for that reason, because as a species, maybe not as individuals or like tribes, but as a species, they've proven to be a little bit adaptable, because they don't just have one way of doing things. They have all sorts of ways of doing things. Like you can't take a West Coast chimp and dump it, in Central Africa and expect it to do well. But uh, you know, generally speaking, like I said, as a species, they've they've branched out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I think it's cool. And yeah, they just eat whatever, man. Like we give them like a pretty much a vegan diet. That's kind of like a big thing. We're under a bunch of like organizations, umbrella organizations. We have the Global Federation of Allied Sanctuaries is one of our like um, governing bodies. And then we have the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance, which is another one, kind of like just kind of interconnects all the sanctuaries. And like the vegan thing is kind of like the preferred diet, just because these are very like animal sensitive groups. But chimpanzees, they don't know what veganism is, you know.
Yeah,
So like they'll eat whatever. Um, it's just if it tastes good or not.
yeah.
That's the only thing that matters.
I guess the reason I ask is just because, like, obviously, it don't like the idea of like cooked foods being the determination between like the amount of power that our brain's allowed to use. I just wonder, like, in terms of if they might, if one chimp was fed like cooked food so it didn't have to digest as much from when it was a baby to when it was um, older, if maybe, hey, for one, hopefully it would be good for it and not harm it. So that's beside the question. But like, if it was good for the chimp and they tried that out, if maybe it would be able to speak like full on sign language and be able to grasp that because it had more ability to put power towards its brain instead of digestion. But I'm
Hmm.
not a scientist. I'm not even sure if that's how exactly how it works.
Yeah. It definitely wasn't one thing. It wasn't one thing that made humans humans and chimpanzees chimps. But I mean, that cooking food was definitely a big deal. Like people who studied that acknowledge that 100% because I mean, we have weak jaws compared to all the other apes. Like apes are crazy. Like they have monstrous jaws. They have monstrous muscles that connect to their jaws. Their teeth are humongous. But yeah, cooking food, it, it made it easier to eat and it made it easier to um, digest food, like you said. And meat eating was probably a really big deal because that's a high calorie food. Um, it's just it gives you a lot of power, like bang for your buck. Like, yeah, you need vegetables, you need fruits, you need all those things that you've got nutrients. But in terms of just pure fuel, like meat is where it's at. So, you know, being able to eat meat efficiently via cooking was a game changer. Um, so yeah, having that ability, having extensive culture. I cannot emphasize enough how important culture is for where we are. Like just being able to pass on what we know and share it. That is why we are what we are. Like that's people want to talk about tools and brain size. It's like no, just the preservation of knowledge is how we got here. If you just like wiped the memory of every human being on the planet, we'd start from zero again. Like we wouldn't be able to pick ourselves back up again. Like it's having that passed down knowledge that makes us who we are. So, I mean, yeah, if chimps, took it to that point, they could do what we do too. Um, but yeah, they don't need to. That's the biggest thing. It's like that's the reason you don't have all sorts of species reaching humanity's level. They don't need to. They're getting by with what they got. There's no external driving force to make them do anything else. We somehow just had all of these weird variables come together that got us to this point where we're adaptable,
Mm-hmm.
flexible, capable of retaining culture, passing on culture. Like it was just a perfect storm, really. Like, and that's all it was. Everything
Yeah.
lined up. The stars were in alignment. Whatever. So yeah, you can't. It's not something you can force, and it's not something you can easily explain. But yeah, there's lots of variables came into place.
Exactly. Yeah. You're right. It's totally like mostly culture and just like a few things that like kind of added to that. I think it's just super interesting. Like just after hearing you talk about how close they are to us, it's just so interesting. And
Yeah, it's
like,
scary. Yeah, it's scary. Like every once in a while they'll do something that's just like a really human thing. Like they'll give you a look or they'll react a certain way and it's just like you laugh. You laugh because they're reacting the same way you or I would react and it's cool. It's really cool. We don't even see them as chimps. Like a lot of us end up calling them people because like they act like people. They have personalities and they react like people would. So it's definitely a thing that some people try to stay away from doing. They call it anthropomorphizing, like attributing human qualities to non-human animals. But it's a little pig-headed again because it's applying a strict barrier to us and the animals, saying like there is a clear line between us and them, and you're crossing it by anthropomorphizing them. It's just like no, that barrier is artificial. Like 99% of human labels are artificial. They're just a convention. They're not a strict inherent law that applies to the universe. They're just something that we created so that we conceptualize things. Like even the species concept isn't a concrete thing. Biology's come up with like 10 different definitions of what a species is. None of them work across the board. There's exceptions to their definitions and they just don't apply. So it's just like it hurts your brain to think about.
yeah, I was gonna
Like
say that's
this,
pretty grand.
yeah, it's very meta. It's just like nothing means anything. Like everything's an accident. It's very Rick and Morty. You just have an
Yes.
existential crisis every time you
Yeah.
think about it. You're just like, I don't matter. Like, oh my god.
I
But
think SparkNote's version of that is that like it's okay to do that because we're all beings, you know? It's
yeah,
same thing with like pets you have. Like you share these bonds and stuff. I mean, definitely different. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like saying like it's the same, but like it my when I'm at my parents' house, my dog like has this specific way of treating me versus other people. And there's a relationship there. same thing with like the chimps. They have different relationships with you, like you were saying. The two you worked with, it was the names again of the two that it was
Hercules and Leo.
Hercules. I wanted to say Zeus,
Yeah.
but Hercules, isn't it?
Close. It was close.
Yeah. Um. Yeah, man. It's just so interesting. I think it's so cool what you guys are doing there. Was there anything else you like wanted to touch on, or
um, no, not really. I feel like we've talked a lot about everything. Yeah, I mean, just as a like outreach aspect, like if anyone's ever interested in finding out about us or contributing at all, like projectchimps.org, that's it. That's our website. You can find all the deets there. You can find out how to help us out, or you can just follow us and just see what we do.
okay?
Uh, yeah. So we've got all the social media channels. We've
Is
got
it still
Facebook.
just
We got
Project Chimp?
Chimps. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's yeah, projectchimps.org, and that's it. That's our place.
I will be
So
linking all of that in the description. If you
yeah,
guys are looking to check it
awesome.
out, please do.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, thanks, man. This has been great, and there's so many questions we could literally go on for like hours, just like kind of asking about your experiences doing this.
yeah.
So
This kind of conversation is like literally what we would do in grad school every day. Like just like really getting down and dirty into like what we are and what they are and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's fun to talk about this stuff for sure. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you, man. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. It's been a blast. Well, thank you, and everyone have a good day.